Starting so I don't forget.
Hi
Hi, Joe.
guys. Hi, Danny and Adam.
Hey,
How you
Joe.
doing? Good to see you guys. I like your wall behind you, Danny, there with
Yeah.
some of
Who's
your favorite people.
is that?
Yeah. Art
Who?
Um,
Carney, Barbara Billingsley.
Don
who's
Knotts.
is
Yeah.
that Don Knotts in the top?
You can see
Look,
him all the way
look
from
the other
there. Oh,
way.
yeah.
Well, I
Yeah.
wasn't
What a
sure from a distance. It almost looks like it could have been Jack Lemmon and Mr. Roberts, but it's Don Knotts.
Do you
Don.
have
Tom
autographs? Are these
Hanks.
all
Oh,
autograph?
I don't have that. Those are all autographed, but
Wow.
I'm sure some of them are fake.
Oh, okay.
We have,
I
I
got
have like,
Ted Williams autograph. I
Oh.
wrote him a fan letter in 1958 and I got a photograph with a signature. I don't know if it's real or not, but you know.
I'm sure it is. My wife, actually, Suzanne, was doing a book with a doctor about eyesight. And she wrote Ted Williams to get a blurb or something. So she has this letter from Ted Williams signed
Wow.
about us. So I'm
That's
jealous,
great.
but I think she doesn't mind my having it also. We
Was it
share
a
it.
was it handwritten or typed?
It was I don't it was typed. That one
Ah.
was typed.
Did I
Typed.
tell you my friend, my best friend when I was a kid was a guy named Bob Cadera, who now writes mystery novels. And in 1961, there was an article on Ty Cobb in the Saturday Evening Post, and he and I wrote fan letters to Ty Cobb. And he wrote his a week before mine. I got back a little signed card, Ty Cobb's signature, which was nice. But he got a three-page letter from Ty Cobb, a handwritten letter. He asked Ty Cobb for advice on how to hit, and Cobb took the trouble to write him a three-page letter about it. Can you imagine?
Yeah, I wonder if Ted Williams wrote Ty Cobb to ask him advice on hitting.
I've seen pictures of, I don't know if you ever saw it. There's a picture of Ty Cobb in the Milwaukee Braves dressing room around
Mm,
1957 talking with Hank Aaron and other Braves, and
yeah.
they're all kind of really listening to Ty Cobb, you know?
It's a diversion of views on Ty Cobb. The original was he was the worst person in history, just a
Yeah,
mean man, and
yeah,
everybody who met him in the 1950s, all the ball players in the 60s, um, they liked him. So,
yeah.
very odd. Anyway, Adam, I don't even know if you're a sports fan.
Well, I grew up just minutes from Shea Stadium,
Hmm.
and not terribly far from Yankee Stadium. So I grew up going to ball games. And there was a period of time in my youth when I became quite a fan. Like I was really getting into it, but I didn't have any close friends that shared it, and I guess the it just sort of wore off pretty quick, you know.
Mm-hmm.
But
Well,
but I know you guys both share that.
one of the interesting things is I've known Joe, or we've known each other, Joe and I've known each other over 60 years. And until we did this book together, we didn't really realize that we had so much in common baseball
Hmm.
wise,
Yeah, yeah,
including we both played a dice baseball game, APBA,
yeah,
obsessively. And that's the
yeah.
thing you did by yourself. You rolled the dice, and the players were actually they performed the way they did on the field. So that was like authentic baseball. We were thinking, and we strategized, and we were our own managers, and
Hmm.
we kept statistics. We had books of statistics, and
Hmm.
that's how we both became expert at math. Oddly
Yeah,
enough,
yeah.
even as a young kids. So,
That's
but we
true.
didn't know that
Yeah,
we never talked baseball when we knew each other until
yeah,
now, 60 years later, and that's what we talk about now more than movies. We talk about
yeah,
baseball.
yeah. It's very interesting, isn't it? What you
Yeah,
learn about your friends that you didn't know, you know?
Well, was there a big period of time where you guys were fell out of touch?
Yeah,
actually, yeah, true.
I I guess so, for whatever reason. Danny is back east and I'm in California, and but
Yeah.
we reconnected, I mean, part of what stimulated me to ask Danny to be, are we recording or?
Yeah, that's the natural question. We kind of slide into the conversation, but we can just Joe, by now you should know how I'm informal. I start these things,
Yeah. Oh, good. Good.
and so we can slide right into it, and it'll be great. I capture some magic that way, so I find.
Yeah. The
So
informality is good. Well, when I
Rock and
was,
Roll High School. That way, I know you were about to say one thing, but that's the later part. But Rock and Roll High School is how we reconnected, if you
this is
yeah.
remember.
in Wisconsin.
No, I had
No.
this is many years later when I wrote Cult Movie Book,
Oh,
and Joe happened to pick it up, and Joe can tell the story.
Yeah, Danny had a terrific essay on Rock and Roll High School, which I co-wrote,
mhm.
and he's he was saying this may be a silly movie, but it's the only maybe a silly teenage comedy, but it's the only American movie he could think of in which a major American institution is destroyed and nobody is punished. And because we blew up the high school at the end of the
All
film, and
right.
that's how it ends with the
Famously,
high school in flames, and um, and we
Joe co-wrote
I
yeah.
know.
that
Yeah.
famous film,
Right, with
Yeah.
Alan
and
Arkish, and I think Joe, having um, read the portion of this book that we're going to talk about, which is called "I Loved Movies, but Conversations with Danny Peary," and that you were hesitant, right? You were a little hesitant to write that ending at first, according to you,
Well,
uh,
I wasn't,
because
but
of the of the bombings that were you had witnessed, like of the in the was it a high school in Madison, or I of course could be conflating things, but I
no
think
mm,
college.
the
It was
college.
a
college.
Oh, right, it was one of the college
Army tech.
buildings on the campus, right?
Yeah, I'll tell that story.
Yeah.
I wasn't hesitant. I mean, that was my idea to end that film. Um,
Well, eventually, but I'll
no,
read the portion.
well, what happened was Alan Arkish wanted to make his directing debut. He and Joe Dante had
Hmm.
co-directed Hollywood Boulevard as kind of a way of getting entree into directing, and it was one of the cheapest movies Roger Corman ever made because the producer John Davison got Roger to agree to it by making him a bet that I could do the cheapest movie you ever did. And I guess Roger's cheapest movie was around $60,000. So Roger gave him 60,000, but they went over budget by 4,000 because the Hollywood sign falls on Mary Warnoff at the end, and that was a special effect that cost $4,000. So, but it was
Mm.
super cheap, and I got to play a role in that film. It's definitely not PC. My role is called drive-in rapist. And what I did, Candace Ryelson, who's a very charming, young, sexy young actress, played the lead role of an actress kind of going through Hollywood and getting, bad behavior from males of all kinds. Um, I was at a drive-in theater where her first movie was showing, and she gets gang raped by a gang of
Mm.
Filipino soldiers in the film, and she gets very upset, and she's drunk also. So I'm watching this with my son and wife. I'm supposed to play a kind of square, middle American kind of guy, and they said they cast me because they said I'm the only guy they knew who wore a suit and tie because I worked on Variety and I always wore a suit and tie. You never knew who you were going to talk to. But I showed up with a kind of fancy, hip-looking shirt that I had happened to buy in a fit of 1970s hipness. And John said, "You double-crossed us by showing up in that shirt." But I got to rewrite my dialogue because I said dialogue's not very good, can I rewrite it? And they said sure. So I had my drive-in father sitting there. I'm complaining about the nudity in this film and the violence and everything, and I said John Wayne would never make a picture like this. That was the line I put in. And so my drive-in father charges into the projection room. Meanwhile, Candace Ryelson is charging into the projection room. We both want the movie pulled off the screen for different reasons, but I see her and the projectionist sees her, and we both start attacking her. And Dick Miller plays her manager, the wonderful character
Right,
actor, Dick
character
Miller.
actor, sure,
He's Joe Dante's favorite actor. He put him in all his movies.
everything. Yeah,
Yeah, and so
great
Joe,
documentary about him.
Yeah, great, wonderful documentary. It's called That Guy, Dick Miller. Wonderful. I recommend it. Um, but Joe was directing this scene, and he what happens is Dick Miller comes in and beats up me and the projectionist,
Oh yeah.
and rescues Candace, and it's kind of funny and
Yeah.
kind of goofy.
I,
But
Rock and Roll High School is a film I've seen several times over the years, and I have to say it is one of those examples of film that does grow on you, and it gets better with repeated viewings. At
hmm.
least that was my experience.
Yeah, well, it's well done. Alan directed it very well, and he got a couple of other guys to rewrite my script, but the story was mine, and the characters were mostly mine. What happened was Roger Corman was so cheap. I mean, I have mixed feelings about him because he's the only guy in Hollywood who would hire young people at the time because
Hmm.
the unions were still very much in charge, and you couldn't get a job unless you were the son of a cameraman or something like that. So Roger was the only guy in town smart enough to hire these talented young people who came out just wanting to make good movies. So he started the careers famously of Coppola and
Yeah,
Bogdanovich and
right.
Scorsese and all kinds of people, Jack Nicholson, the long, long list. And so I sold my first three scripts to Roger, and my first was that I sold was Rock City, which was a
Mm.
comedy drama about Dick Clark and American Bandstand, which I was into when I was a kid. And they were Alan and Joe were going to co-direct that. Alan was going to do the musical numbers, and Joe, who had grown up in Philadelphia, was going to do the
Mm.
story scenes. And unfortunately, Dick Clark was in Roger's office one day discussing some deal, and Roger ran into the story editor's office and said, "Where's that script that Joe wrote?" And she gave it to him, and he gave it to Dick Clark. And the next day, Dick Clark called up and said he'd be extremely unhappy if they made that film. So that's the end of that film. And we would have been ahead of The Idolmaker and Hairspray. Hairspray became this big
Sure.
thing.
John Waters.
But it stamped me as what they considered an expert on teenagers, which I thought was kind of a joke because I'm not a fan of most teenage movies which pander to teenagers in stupid ways. But um, what happened was, so Alan and Joe, Roger's way of getting around the Writers Guild, which he was a signatory to, you had to pay 8,000 for an original script, but if it was a rewrite, it was 4,000. So he would get somebody to dictate a script, and I put it in quotes, into a tape recorder and pay him $200. So Joe and Alan sat around and dictated a 60 or 70 page script into a tape recorder. It had no plot. It was just kids goofing around in a high school. And they called me in on a Friday and gave me the script and said, "We really need a plot. And if you can come up with one by Monday, we'll let you write this thing." And um, so I had to scramble. And what writers do is you kind of have ideas that you have in your mind that you might like to do. And my father in 1927, Ray McBride, who became a newspaper reporter for the Milwaukee Journal, he led a student strike at his school, Superior Central High School in Wisconsin. And his father was a teacher there, so it took some guts to lead a strike. And they had fired a beloved teacher, Lulu Dickerson, because she was making fun of the school board in her classes, I guess. And this made national news. Time magazine covered it, et cetera. And my dad led the strike for like a month, and then the students won the strike, and Lulu was rehired. And but the kids were so docile in those days that they volunteered to go to school in the summer to make up the missing classes. But I thought that might make a good movie, but I thought for the 1970s it's kind of tame, And so then I thought, well, what about the Sterling Hall bombing? And Danny was around at the time. Sterling Hall was where the physics department was and the math department, and um, they were
Oh, the
doing
Army Math Research Center part.
yeah
That was
yeah they housed the Army Math Research Center, which was picking bombing targets for Vietnam and things like that. So the students, the
Right. Protested.
Daily Cardinal was writing articles about it, and students were protesting, and it was a bad thing to have this on campus, but some kind of airheaded guys decided to blow it up, and
Yeah. Yeah.
they blew up this building in 1970, and I covered it for the Wisconsin State Journal, and I actually predicted this. I My first trip to Hollywood was that week before that, and I was talking to Orson Welles. He put me on the other side of the wind. We can talk about that. That's me in the background on the other side of the wind.
Hmm.
And I said to him, the students
Hmm.
in Madison were getting crazy and they were going to kill somebody pretty soon. And he got very upset because he thought anti-war students could do no wrong. But I said some of them were violent and setting buildings on fire and yeah, et cetera, et cetera. And so when I landed at the airport, I said to the cab driver, "What's been happening since I left?" He said, "The students just blew up a building and they killed a graduate student, Robert Fastnacht, and they saw his bicycle outside, so they knew that somebody was in the building. And they were fugitives. They were caught, except one guy, Leo Burt, was never caught. And I think he was a agent provocateur for the government, and he's probably living under a witness protection program. But
Mm.
anyway, this was a big thing. So I thought,
Yeah.
okay, we'll have the kids blow up the school at the end, and
Right. I
I
my my what I interpreted from this passage in this your book, both of you in this your book, being your book, that you didn't want to be disrespectful, or maybe you were hesitant because of
no,
that of
no, no,
event having taken place and what was going on in the country, in the
yeah,
on
yeah.
West Ninth Street in the Village around that time as well.
Well,
So
the
maybe there was
Madison,
some hesitation showing bombing at that time.
no, not at all.
Okay.
Not for me anyway. I mean, I thought it'd be a great
Okay.
ending for the film. Um, Today you couldn't do that because of Columbine and what other things. But back then, Roger Corman liked anarchic political statements, and I wanted to make this silly movie political and but
That's hard
entertaining
to.
at the same time. And so I thought the ending would be good. And actually, on Monday, I came in and I told them the plot, and they said, "Okay, great, we'll hire you." But Alan said, "I think it would make the kids unsympathetic," exact quote, to blow up the school. So I had to kind of persuade him. And
Hmm.
he says now that a week later he realized it's the only possible ending for the movie. And then he started lying about it and saying it was his idea. And he started saying when he was in
Mm.
high school he would fantasize about blowing up the school, but he didn't tell me
That's
that.
not so original, though. You know,
No, well, it hadn't happened. I can't think of an American movie where they blew
didn't
up.
mean people weren't fantasizing about it way before that.
Yeah, yeah. Well, except he didn't
Yeah,
tell us at the time, so I doubt
right.
that
Oh
story.
no, it
But
was yours. Uh, uh, let me set
I'll
this.
interrupt you a second. Just saying, going back to the original thing is I wrote very flatteringly about rock and roll high school in my first cult
Oh yeah.
movies book. And then later on, and then Joe, you can listen to this, is I asked Alan Arkish, I was writing about cult movies in the
mm,
1980s when nobody wanted to have a cult movie. They wanted big movies. And I asked Alan Arkish, I said, was this the first film besides Adventures of Buckaroo Banzai where you actually intended to make a cult movie?
mm,
And he said no.
mm.
So he's very aghast. He didn't want to make a cult movie, but I have a feeling you were still trying to hit a target audience of outsiders. So what were you thinking about that in regard to?
Yeah.
So you didn't have
Well,
any thoughts that it would be this big blockbuster mainstream movie, right?
we hoped it would break out, because I mean the Ramones were
Hmm.
um, sort of a fringe thing. They had trouble getting their records on the radio because they're very edgy, and that's one reason I liked them. They had songs about glue sniffing and child abuse and other things so they couldn't get their records played very much. And but I love them because they reminded me of the early days of rock when I was into rock in the 50s. And because they had a strong beat and they had wonderful lyrics to their songs, very, very sophisticated lyrics.
And you may as well, if you're comparing. I mean, they also kind of stuck to that, like 3 minute song, 3 minute plus song, and mostly using two or three chords. Much
Yeah.
like a lot of early '50s music, rock
Yeah, it was
music.
kind of a simple, strong beat, but
Yeah,
as Dick Clark used to
a lot of
say,
energy.
Dick Clark used to say, "It's got a beat you can dance to." That was one of his pet
Right, of
phrases.
course.
And
Well,
so when so Alan hired them, and they're very anarchic guys, punk rock.
Yeah.
He had been turned down by a few other bands, but when he got them, that really helped make the character of the movie um, interesting. But since they are kind of fringy, they weren't as big now as then as they are now. I mean, in retrospect, they still have a lot of fans.
Right now they are considered icons, having been
In
like the
that
first
time,
American punk
they
band.
were cult figures,
Right.
as was PJ Souls.
Hmm.
Yeah,
So,
and PJ came
so
from
from
she came from
Halloween.
Halloween, which was kind of a cult movie, but
Sure.
Yeah.
a very popular movie.
And
But
then Stripes.
Roger had, but what happened was, unfortunately, Roger released Rock and Roll High School like his other formula, um, youth pictures. He dumped it into the Southwest in neighborhood theaters. And his strategy was to start in one part of the country and then move it to another part of the country. He had states' rights distributors and all that. And he didn't open a film in New York or LA to get reviews like you would with a film where you're hoping to get prestige. So
Which Joe, I'll interrupt you, which was one of the reasons Adam asked me when we reconnected is he got so few notices. People were writing so rarely about this really, really interesting, good movie that he was very pleased to see that I wrote about it in Cult Movies. So Joe actually called me
Mhm.
from California to New York to say thank you. And that's how we reconnected.
I
He
see.
said,
Yeah, and I
when
was by then I was aware of Danny's wonderful writing. I mean, he and I have both done about 25 books, I think, right, Danny?
yeah.
Danny's done books on baseball as well
I
as
know. Yeah.
film, and he co-wrote a marvelous biography of Roger Maris, a very interesting man, and Gil Hodges, and he worked with Ralph Kiner on his autobiography, and he wrote books with Tim McCarver, and he did a fantastic book called "We Played the Game," where he went around and interviewed the great players and also journeyman players from the 50s and 60s, the
Well,
period
one of
when,
the things
you know,
Joe and I have in common, Adam, you probably can relate to this,
Hmm.
is our youths affected everything that came after. We
Mhm.
are
You're right. Yeah.
just so much of movies and television
Hmm.
and
It's true. You're
rock and
absolutely,
roll.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I would agree with that too. My current obsessions are definitely come from my youth. For absolutely
Hmm.
true. So
Mhm.
we all share that, and I just want to set the stage a little bit. Although I think anybody listening or watching, can get an indication of just why these two guys collaborate on this book. They have a lot of shared history and shared um, uh, things they are passionate about and that they love. But I'm curious to know. I know you guys go way back. You said your friendship started over 60 years ago, and I'm just curious what the conversation was. What came about? How did the idea to work on this interview format book come about?
Oh,
Well,
Joe can finish that because that's the what he was saying after the connection with the Rock and Roll High School years later.
mhm.
We can reconnected again
Yeah.
over, I think it was Touch of Evil and a couple of his critical studies
Mhm.
that we started doing interviews. I would interview him and post my interviews.
Oh, so
And
these were for like your Danny for you,
yeah,
like journalistic kind of film journalism that you where you would interview an Orson Welles expert.
well, Joe came to New York to at the Film Forum and gave a lecture on Touch of Evil.
Mm,
And here's the expert in the world
yes.
on Orson Welles,
What year was that?
and we connected. What it was when there was a new version of Touch of Evil came out, so Joe
A new
can
print?
pinpoint the
Well,
time,
I
the
think
date.
that came out in '98. It was
Okay.
Walter Murch took Wells's 50
Hmm.
some page memo and did 50
Oh,
50 changes to the film that Wells had asked Universal to make, and
Right.
Those were all that he could make with the existing footage. But actually, when I came to New York, it was a few years later because they were having a series of Wells films at the Film Forum, which is a great place for
It's one
classic
of the
films.
best.
And I
Yeah.
did an evening with Chris Wells Fetter, who is Wells's oldest daughter, and she's still going strong. And she's in Macbeth. She's plays Macduff's child, and she and I did an evening with the restored Macbeth that was she had never seen, and it was wonderful. And then
Wow.
I
Yeah.
did something on Touch of Evil, and Danny and I and his wife Suzanne had dinner, and it was great to reconnect. And then Danny, as he said, he did long interviews with me about my collection, Two Chairs for Hollywood, which is a collection of my short articles and interviews. And then he did one on my Ernst Lubitsch book, and I was so pleased by his in-depth and empathetic questions that when I was asked to do an interview book about my career, Paul Cronin, who's the publisher of this new fascinating imprint, Sticking Place Books, which is doing a series of books on film critics and historians, interviews about their life, about their careers, not so much about their private lives, but unless it impinges on the career. But he recommended I get an interviewer. He said you could do it on your own or just, but I thought it'd be more fun to get an
For
interviewer,
sure.
kind of bring up things that maybe that I wouldn't have thought of. Or I asked Danny to challenge me, and so we did it by email, and it was really a lot of fun going back and forth. I knew it would be good with Danny doing it.
Okay.
Danny,
You use the
how did,
word challenge a lot.
yeah.
Challenge me with questions.
Yeah.
That's
So can you think, Danny, and then Joe, you can have your own answer, I suppose. But Danny, do you have an example of when maybe, or a case of where Joe, or where you challenged Joe, I should say.
But I challenge, well, I challenge Joe. Joe's main thing in life and all his careers, mainly as a journalist, but also even goes as a teacher and a screenwriter, whatever, is
Sure.
seeking the truth. And basically, I challenge him to open up and to be candid and not ever, you know, pull back. I wrote in my intro how I would think how are people going to react to this? How are people going to react to what Joe's saying? This is far too much, but that's the way he's always been, and that's who
Mhm.
Joe is. So basically, to say everything he wants to say. This is his big opportunity. This is a long book, a long career, a long life of things happening, and they all every era of Joe McBride overlaps with one another. It's all
Yes.
connected,
Right. Right.
and it's to get his story out and say people want to hear, people want to read this, people want to know about you. So his anybody's reluctance says when they do a memoir kind of book is people want to know that, or is that too
Mhm.
much, and it's for me to get him to come out, which I think he trusted me, and he followed. I wouldn't say he followed my lead, but we collaborated really
Yeah.
well together.
Hmm.
And for me to collaborate with Joe McBride, who hasn't had a book collaborator for how many years? 55 years. He'd only
Uh,
had one before, and he's
yeah.
reluctant to ever have one
Well,
again.
Yeah.
And
the Orson
it
Welles
worked out
work.
it
Yeah.
worked out really well. But that's the challenge. I mean, basically the main thing with Joe is his youth. I can't believe he went through it. I can't believe he survived this youth.
Let's talk about it a little bit
Let's talk
because,
about it
yeah.
again and open up old wounds, and you're gonna do
Yeah.
that. And then even
Mhm.
even the years when he went to Hollywood, where I wasn't jealous or envious, but I was so impressed that he's meeting all these people and writing for Variety and writing for AFI, and I thought he had like the most glamorous movie life in the world, and it turns
Yeah.
out there was a lot of hurt and pain that went on,
Mhm.
and tell me about this, Joe. I don't know about this, and
Right.
that's the big challenge. And we have the book there. It's an unbelievable story that we convey in this book.
I agree. And Joe, how was it for you? Because having read maybe a dozen of your books, maybe pushing towards a dozen, and I see little bits of autobiographical things come in here and there about, your relationship with certain people, or, on a professional level, or your own just career. They leak through a little bit here and there, but nothing very personal, nothing certainly intense or or over um shared or anything of the nature.
Mm.
So this is a quite a departure. Would
Yeah,
would did
it
you
is a,
feel uncomfortable, talking about your painful childhood? Were you welcoming it?
well, the childhood I had dealt with to some extent in a book called The Broken Places, which came out in 2015.
Okay,
I've been self-publishing certain books since
right.
that became a viable option. Once, with computers, you can set a book and type and make it look really professional. And then Amazon started carrying self-published books, which was a big deal
And you
because
can, yeah,
my first book that was published, Persistence of Vision, which was with my friends at the Wisconsin Film Society, including Danny's brother Jerry, um, was self-published, but we didn't. I couldn't get it in bookstores. I went around to bookstores and nobody would carry these self-published books. But now you can sell them, electronically. So I did a book called The Broken Places, which was a memoir of my troubled youth. When I was a kid, I came from a dysfunctional alcoholic household, and there was some abuse, and I was abused in school by nuns and beaten up by boys. And one of the nuns in third grade was insane, and she had this vendetta against me for some reason I didn't understand. I still don't. And she gave every girl in the class one of those long rulers that nuns have. If you went to Catholic school, you'd remember they have like a 36-inch wooden ruler. And every girl had one, and she said, hit Joe over the head if he's misbehaving anytime during the day. Walk by his desk. And so all day long, for the
yeah.
first semester, girls were hitting me in the head. And
And then I'm sorry to interrupt you. It's um quite a story, but I mean, not only is that nun perpetuating abuse against you, but she's
Mhm.
also perpetuating abuse against these girls.
Yes,
In a less,
right, right.
but they're making them, like obviously involving them in this abusive behavior with they don't know any
That,
better.
frankly, I hadn't thought of that, but that's a really good point. That by encouraging them to be violent, that's a very bad lesson. And some of the girls didn't go along with it. I happened to sit next to the meanest girl in the class, and she was whacking me all day. But there was a girl named Sue Jones who was one of the nice girls. Actually, what happened was in the second semester, the nun moved my desk up to the front with my back to the class, and I was
Hmm.
facing the blackboard, which was even worse in a way because I was being ostracized. But there was one of the nice girls was named Mary Sturl, who was the prettiest girl in the class too. And she started crying one night when her mother was giving her a bath, and she said the teacher was being so mean to Joe and to a girl. There was a girl in the class she was abusing. And the mothers began talking to each other, and then they all went to the pastor, and he sent her off to a mental hospital by the end of the year. But the damage had been done. But
Right.
but I kind of won that battle. I outlasted this insane nun. And I had a nice teacher in fourth grade who was a lay teacher, not a nun, but just one of the ladies who had a boy in the
Hmm.
school, and she donated her time to be a teacher, which is what people did in those days. And she
Hmm.
was very, very kind to me, and she kept me after school every day for the whole year, ostensibly to practice my bad handwriting, but I think it was just to talk to me for an hour, and she was very motherly, and I liked that. But
Helped you heal
yeah,
a
it
little
helped
bit,
me
at
heal.
least
Yeah, and
somewhat.
then when I went to high school, I had a good time in high school, Marquette University High School. The guys were all nice guys. There was no bullying. I was bullied by some of the boys in my school. Years later, I went to a class reunion of
Hmm.
all the classes that ever went to my grade school were invited to this thing, and I was seated with some of my classmates, and one of the guys was my chief abuser, bully guy, and he came up to me and I was very short in those days, but now I towered above all the kids. I'm 6'2.5", and this guy came up to me. He's like 5'6", and little old man, and he was this fierce abuser, and he was very apologetic, and he said, "You didn't realize my father was abusing me at home, so I took it out on you, and I'm very sorry." He seemed like a very nice guy, and he ran an auto repair shop, and he said he wrote poems, and I took his number, and I was going to look him up, and I thought it'd be fun to just sit around and talk to him, but he died not too long after
Oh,
that. But
yeah.
but but anyway, in high school we did have a priest. Jesuit priests were great teachers, but they were a little crazy too, and they had a school disciplinarian, Father Boyle, who would whip us with a sawed-off golf club on the ass. And that happened to me once,
Uh,
and it was so painful. I didn't want to do it again. So I really behaved. But I was
it
so,
worked. Yeah.
it worked. And I was so fanatical about school that I had a breakdown, and I was troubled by my sexual feelings. I didn't know how to deal with them because Father Boyle actually wrote the sex manual for our school called Modern Youth and Chastity. Today it reads like a joke, is like written by somebody in Dr. Strangelove or something.
Mm.
All about, he said that kissing should be determined by the fear rule, FEAR. He says if it becomes frequent, enduring, and ardent, it's a mortal sin. You go to hell for kissing a girl. So I didn't meet girls in high school, and I had this nervous breakdown and physical breakdown. I became anorexic, and in the middle of my senior year, I was put in a mental hospital, and it was actually the best thing that ever happened to me because I got out of my home, I got out of my school, I got out of Vietnam eventually because of
And
that.
and you met
And I,
us and you created you formed a relationship there during that time, right?
yeah, I met this wonderful girl who was half Native American, half Irish, brilliant, brilliant, very sophisticated, and very sexy, and just a great person. She was pretty sarcastic and all that, so we had kind of a mixed time together. But she was considered schizophrenic in those days. The
I see.
diagnoses were kind of crude, and today she'd probably be treated with the right medicine and maybe be okay. But she was disassociated from reality quite a lot. And
Mhm.
for example, for 2 weeks in the summer in 1965, when we were dating, she thought she was Barbara Streisand, and she would go around singing People, and I had to call her Barbara, and it was very weird. But a funny thing, I think I mentioned this in the book, but many years later, I wrote a script for Barbara Streisand
Hmm.
about the quiz show scandals that didn't get made, but she was going to make her directing debut and star in this film. And I found it very easy to write for her because I had dated her in a sense, but I didn't dare tell the people at the Streisand office that. They would have thought I was nuts. But I saw all the films she had made, so I could enter into her voice. I rewrote a script that I had done, not knowing who would play the part. But anyway, long story short, it took me 49 years to get The Broken Places turned into a memoir.
Yeah.
And
Was that? Hmm.
I got it out in 2015. It had gone through the period of being a screenplay. I was trying to sell it as a screenplay, and there was a lot of misadventures connected with that. So I turned it into a novel. I couldn't sell the novel. And then I realized it should be a memoir. And then when the memoir came out, some people who read it said it should be a movie. It'd be a great movie. And I felt like screaming
I
because I
know,
had
right? Yeah. Yeah,
tried
definitely.
really hard to get it made as a movie.
Well,
It
but
would
it
be,
sounds like it was provided some catharsis for you potentially in that by the time maybe Danny was encouraging you to open up about these things, you had already had some experience on the
Well,
page.
Joe was inspired by her tragic death to write this. I mean, that's what
Mhm.
really got him as a catalyst for
This
that
is the
book,
young woman you're talking about, the
The
schizophrenic young
Broken
woman.
Places. I mean, The Broken Places. I knew Joe all those years, and then reading The Broken Places, you say, "Oh my God, poor Joe."
Yeah.
And it
Yeah.
was just such a sad story. I wanted to ask Joe, and Joe never will answer this, has never answered,
I,
so I'm doing this publicly.
Oh,
The
good.
movie David and Lisa.
oh,
Did you ever connect to that because of your relationship with
no,
it?
I had seen it. but I thought it was too sentimental. It was schmaltzy and it wasn't realistic in my opinion. It wasn't painful enough. Like, you
Hmm.
know, the pain of being schizophrenic like she was, and like
I thought finding a connection in that mental hospital. I think Splendor in the Grass had
right.
something like that as well. But just I'm reading Broken Places, where you had, the trauma going on at the school and at home with alcoholic parents, where you had to sit in your room and watch TV by yourself in order to survive, as you said.
Hmm. Hmm.
that that I was so happy for you to find somebody reading the Broken Places in this mental hospital. So it was,
Hmm.
imagine your life without having had that at that point in time.
Well, she saved my life because I was a mess, when I met
Mm.
her, and she kind of taught
Yeah.
me taught me how to live too. And I had a friend named John Sanford who was a wonderful undiscovered writer who wrote books on American history and he wrote novels. He was a communist throughout his whole life. He was Esquire called him the last communist in America because he was so stubborn. He never left the party. But he was blacklisted, and his wife, Marguerite Roberts, the screenwriter, was blacklisted. And anyway, after his wife died, he all he wrote was books about his wife. He wrote, I think, 5 books about his wife. And I said, "Why do you keep writing about her?" And he said, "Because I couldn't resurrect her, I write books
Mm.
about her." And that's how I felt about
Mm.
the Broken Places when I came to write the memoir. I was trying to couldn't resurrect my girlfriend, but I was writing the book as a tribute to her. And as Danny correctly gathers, that kept me going all those years to really tell that story more than my own saga. But I learned from Tennessee Williams, who I read all his plays and other works, and I admire him so much. And he said a writer should never be embarrassed. And so it was hard back in those days to talk about your mental problems, and I didn't
There was
talk
so
about
much
it.
more stigma. It was so much more stigmatized.
Yeah, there was stigma, and Danny said he didn't know about it. That's because I didn't talk about it to people in
Yeah.
Madison. Because
Yeah.
I think I tried to talk to a couple of people, and they didn't want to hear about it. It's kind of like guys who were in World War II, like my dad. He wasn't in combat, but you couldn't get those guys to talk about the war. All that whole generation of men was raised to be stoical and not show emotion, and there was a stigma about talking about killing. I mean, the only veteran I ever met who admitted killing people was Sam Fuller, the movie director, and he was an infantryman in World War II. Of course, he killed people, and he talked about it. He was frank about it, and but he was the kind of frank filmmaker who let it all hang out, and I was inspired by
Right.
him too. But anyway, so late in my career, I began writing more autobiographical stuff. My book, Whatever Happened to Orson Welles, is a memoir of my friendship and working relationship with Wells, as well as a critical study of his work. It's kind of a hybrid. And Two Cheers for Hollywood, I wrote a long personal introduction called I Love Movies, But, and that's where I got the title for this new book. And so I think as you get older, writers tend to be more autobiographical. But just one more thing I'll say, turning it over to Danny again. Um, I still think my Frank Capra biography is probably my most revealing book. And well,
Interesting.
I
Are you
mean,
talking about the one that was done during the pandemic, but came out
well,
during the...
no, I did 2 books on Capra. One was a
Yes.
biography of Frank Capra, The
Right.
Catastrophe of Success, came out in '92, and I did a revised version in 2000 when I
Hmm.
got a hold of his FBI files and other documents. And that is so personal, that book. I mean, even though I don't bring myself into it that much overtly, but you reveal things about what you care about and what you feel. And
Sure.
then I did, as the book you're alluding to, I did a book about the writing of the book and the researching, and then the 4-year legal battle I had to get that book published, which was really an ordeal. It was called Frankly Unmasking Frank Capra, which came out um, during the pandemic years. I forget the year, but it's a 600
Hmm.
page book about the
Yeah.
making of that
No,
book.
it's an amazing story that I thought also revealed a lot about your personal life. And certainly as a young, um, burgeoning film writer,
I
Yeah.
always
and
thought
a
I
young
I
family
always
man.
thought that all Joe's books are somewhat autobiographical,
Mm.
and as somebody who inspired my writing, which he, as I said, autobiographical. I always felt when I write it, I try to be conversational, and I
Hmm.
always kept myself in the writing. People would get to know me. That's
Mhm.
from Joe. Joe was
Mm.
always like that, so I always felt he was writing, revealing himself. He never felt that he had to hold back, which we really doesn't do. And I love movies, but I mean, he goes all out in that book, thankfully, and we should thank him for that because he's
Thank you,
so
Danny.
candid. That's a good example. I'm sure he's going to inspire a lot of people who do books after him with memoirs. So that this is what you can do. You can be this open to people because
Mhm.
that's who your readers are. And I've always felt that from Joe. Is I write conversationally as I have his conversations going on with my readers.
Hmm.
You know.
Mm.
Well,
Well,
I was going to
But
ask you
Joe,
certainly.
that.
Joe writes
Go
very.
ahead,
Joe's like
Joe.
writes really, really, really smart books that everybody can read.
That's very true.
I was going to ask you that question, Danny, but you partly answered it. Do you consider your books autobiographicals? I mean, the baseball when um,
Oh yeah,
when they played the game, you can sense your presence throughout, empathizing and being awed by these great players and understanding. One thing I love about that book is
thank you.
you talk to some of the great players, but a lot of them are just ordinary players who maybe been forgotten, but they deserve to tell their
Yeah, I
story.
think I did 65 players of only two of them still alive. Unfortunately,
Wow.
so sad as all these people
Hmm.
die off. But there are only about five Hall of Famers, and there are a lot of people, that I loved as a kid. I'm grateful to these players for making my childhood so good. It filled up my
Mhm.
childhood with the athletes and the actors and the movie, all the movie people and the
Hmm.
TV stars. I thank them all because my
Mhm.
childhood was really nice because of that and fun.
Hmm.
So, yeah, so um, th- I think I reveal myself a lot. I mean, I got into Joe. You don't know this. My first baseball book was Cult Baseball Players,
Mhm.
and I'd only done movie books. And I wanted to meet my favorite baseball player, Vic
That's a
Power,
great idea.
in Puerto Rico, and said, "How can?"
Mhm.
And I talked to my editor, who's a good friend of mine. And I said, "How can I come up with a book which would allow me to go meet Vic
Mhm.
Power?" And we came,
Wow.
why not cult baseball players? And I said, okay. And I
Mm.
called Vic Power up. He said if I come to Puerto Rico, he'd be happy to meet me. And that started my baseball
And
writing
you
career,
became
my sports
lifelong
writing career.
friends. Yeah, you
So, and
became lifelong pals.
we
That's
became
great.
lifelong friends, which is impossible.
I was
But
so envious of that because, yeah.
Adam, Joe McBride, as a college in the college days, went to Hollywood for 1 week, met Orson
I know
Welles,
this
got
story.
cast in his movie, met John Ford, met Peter
Renoir.
Bogdanovich, met Jean Renoir.
Right.
It's just 1 week,
That's week
and
number one.
but
Week number
we
one. Yeah.
we
But
we
it's
share
all
our
downhill
India.
from there. I mean, as far as meeting
The
your
the
heroes.
only the
Yeah.
only thing that
Yeah.
equals it out is I met Vic Power, so I'm fine. So
Well, when I was in college, I knew a guy named Steve Ritter. He was one of my roommates for a while. His dad, Lawrence Ritter, wrote a
a
great
good
book.
friend of mine, Lawrence River. He was
Oh,
a
you
great
you
friend
knew,
of mine. We used to always have lunch together, and he'd pick up his soup bowl and drink it with his hands. That was
wow,
my. But he left. The glory of their times is the great baseball interview book, and Larry Ritter wrote the intro for We Played the Game.
right, right.
So that's our friendship. And I miss Lawrence Ritter. He was a
That's
good
right. I
man.
didn't know you knew him, but I see those
Yeah.
books as similar because Ritter pioneered that thing where but he was old enough that he interviewed some of the guys who've been dead now for a long time, and they're legendary figures. And
What We Play the Game was meant to be a continuation of Lawrence
Mhm.
Ritter's book,
Right.
except he shared all the royalties with his guys, and I didn't share any royalties with
Ah,
the people I interviewed because that was how I made my living. He was
yeah.
an economics professor, so
Oh yeah.
he didn't really need the money. So, but we were close friends here
Oh.
in New York City.
Well,
So
Hmm.
when I was in college, my friend Steve told me he went with his dad on a lot of those interviews, and he met, I don't know, Joe McGinnity or whoever these guys were, that amazing players that young people would never meet otherwise. But he had the privilege. But Danny, I envied him because I was a huge baseball fan, but I didn't really get to know these people as people. I did it. My first article professionally was on Warren Spahn, who was my hero, the greatest left-handed pitcher in baseball history. And
Hmm.
I used to see him pitch all the time. And his son Greg was on my little league team. And
Oh, right.
my mother said, "Why don't you write an article about Greg and his dad?" And so she sold it. I wrote it, and she kind of helped me a little bit, more than a little. And then she sold it to a
Hmm.
national school magazine. And that was my first, I made $40 in 1960, which was a big deal for a kid. And I began writing baseball articles and I never sold another one because I didn't have any inside information to impart. But it wasn't until I discovered I could write about movies in 1967 that I started publishing. But I didn't get to know Warren Spahn much, except he did coach our little league team one night, and we played pepper with him and all that. And I chatted with him. He was just tells you how baseball has changed. Warren Spahn would actually give kids a ride home from the ballpark. Can you imagine? Because you'd go in the parking lot after the game and get autographs. I met all these players, and they were almost everybody. Only three guys wouldn't give me their autograph in all those years. Joe Torre, uh, oh
I
gosh,
have a lot of his autographs if you want to borrow.
yeah, Robin
But are they
Roberts,
real?
Robin
And
Roberts.
I have a couple of his too. So
I said to Robin
Wow. How
Roberts,
many?
I said,
I loved Robin Roberts as a pitcher. Yeah, I loved him
he was a
as a
great pitcher.
little
I said,
kid.
I'm collecting autographs of pitchers who are going to win 300 games. And he said, you'll have to go somewhere else, kid. And he wound up with 286 victories, and I felt
Wow.
sort of a schadenfreude. But actually, that was remarkable given that he pitched for a lousy team, the Philadelphia Phillies, which were
Yeah,
mostly a bad team. But Don Newcombe wouldn't give me his autograph. You met
and
Don
I
Newcombe, didn't you?
yes, I met him for we played the game. He gave me a nice interview. So he was a good guy to me. It's amazing how depends on the day. You know,
Yeah.
Adam and I did a lot of interviews at the same time. I would leave an interview, he would come in for the interview. It was uncanny. It was like not
Really?
with once or twice. It was be like five, six, seven, eight times that I would leave an interview, he would come in, or he would leave an interview and I would come
Oh,
in. This is it was weird, but yeah, you'll
And wait,
see when
so
people talk about this. He's such a nice guy,
hmm.
or talk about a movie star they met for 2 minutes or a half or 30 seconds. And it
Oh,
all depends on what kind of day it is for these
yeah, yeah,
guys, you know, because they can be
yeah.
nice one
for
day and
sure. Yeah.
bad.
They
So,
had a fight with
which is
their wife in the morning. I mean, who knows?
Well,
why I don't like
Don
the.
Newcombe had a drinking problem, and he looked
Oh
hungover.
yeah,
That he was sitting in the
Yeah,
back of the bus, like,
sure.
oh
But
he was
Adam,
bad.
so
Yeah,
you and Danny kind of tied in with. Did you get to know each other that way, or?
Well, I remember having a very nice, at least one lunch together because most of the time,
We met at
Oh,
Tribeca Film Festival. I know
right,
that, and
very early
over
on.
the and we'd see each other all the time because
oh,
we picked
wow.
the same people we wanted to interview. That's the
That's a
weird
good point.
Frederick Weissman kind of thing.
Oh my God.
You know,
Yeah,
yeah. So
That's
right.
I would be leaving and he would be coming in. So
that's
we always picked the same. We'd be offered in New York like lots and
Oh
lots
my
of
God. Yeah,
interviews.
endless.
All
Yeah,
the publicists would want us to do
yeah.
interviews, and we pick. You know, we don't have time to do everybody, so we pick. I'll interview that person,
hmm,
and we'd
hmm.
always pick the same person because we go in and out. So
Well,
we
I
had the
mean, knowing
same
that I was
taste
following Danny, I felt proud of my, taste and
choices.
my choices.
Who were
But
some of the
Good.
people you guys both interviewed then?
I don't remember. The
I have to
guy
go
I
back.
think Frederick Weissman, I remember that
Oh,
distinctly. I think it was at the Film Forum, in fact, one of
oh,
the
That's right.
little
Right.
rooms up there. The
hmm.
Battle of Algiers writer. Did you do him? I don't know. I can't.
No, but
Franco
pick things wrong.
Salinas. Franco
That
Yeah.
was
Salinas. Yeah.
wow. No, but
So
upstairs at Film Forum, um, oh, I got to make sure I remember this name because the director of the Tin Drum and some a part of the German New Wave and come on,
Schlondorf.
Schlondorf,
Schlondorf. Yeah.
Volker
Otto
Schlondorf. That
Schlondorf.
was one of my favorites of all time, but I don't think I ran into you that one. I was just
That might
having
be
a
a
flashback.
rare
But
time,
Yeah.
but it was uncanny, but it was also
yeah,
fun because that was the way we could
yeah, we should
please say
spend a little
hello to
time
each other.
comparing notes. It would be kind of fun to
Yeah,
see
yeah.
those years in the mid, I'm assuming about right around 10, 12 years ago,
Hmm.
Hmm.
maybe a
You
little
know,
even further.
Joe, the way you talk about our my connection to Adam, like how you and I never talked about baseball,
Yeah.
and Adam and I never talked about music. And Adam's a big music person,
Hmm.
he just recently posted he got his first Martin guitar. I see,
Yeah,
so
yeah.
Hmm.
so
Well,
that's a big thing. So he's a singer.
Oh,
Joe
yeah. I didn't know
Adam
all that.
sings and plays
Wow.
guitar. Yeah, so
well,
I
the
didn't
funny
know
thing
that when I
is,
met him.
for most, I'll tell you why, because about when my son was born, right around that time, and I was also was around the time where I lost my. I was working at in a big music distribution company for many years, and I lost that job, and my marriage ended. I was going through this period, and that's when I got to know you, Danny.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
so I had kind of put the guitar down by and large, with some exceptions, but I had really been diligent player since I was a kid.
Hmm.
And I took jazz guitar, and I was, very I was a very good musician, and I just kind of put it aside, more or less, like by the early 2000s, mid aughts, what have you, and then rediscovered my love and my relationship with it during the pandemic because all of a sudden I had all this time at home again, and I
Hmm.
just went back to it with quite a passion. So
Wow.
yeah, it's my version of baseball, but I did know
Hmm.
about you both and your
Hmm.
your history of writing about baseball in addition to film.
Well, a couple
And
things Danny challenged me on, or
yeah,
you know, he brought up topics that I was neglecting to talk about, but two of them, when we were writing about my early years and the influences, he said, "Weren't you into rock and roll when you were a kid?" And I had neglected to write about that because I think in the rock and roll high school section, I said the Ramones reminded me of, Bill Haley and the Comets and Chuck Berry
sure.
and those guys. And so, yeah, I mean, I had a little friend, Dickie Swearingen, when I was 7 or 8, and he and I were best friends. And he was a young hipster. This guy, he got into rock and roll the first week. I mean, they say the first rock and roll song was maybe Shaboom in 1954, but in 55, Bill Haley and the Comets reissued Rock Around the Clock, and that's often considered the start of rock and roll
Right. Some
because
people say Rocket
The
88
Blackboard
from
Jungle.
yeah,
Blackboard Jungle had come out, and that
right.
helped propel that song. But Dickie bought the 45, you could buy it for 98 cents down at the record store. And I bought it the week after, so I was a week behind him. But I started buying, Elvis and Chuck Berry records and all that stuff and watching American Bandstand. And so then I wrote about that in our book. And the other thing Danny reminded me of, I was talking about TV shows that, Danny already said, that I regarded TV as my salvation in those days because it was a window onto the outside world of sanity that the world
Right.
world seemed sane compared to my household. But he said, didn't you watch comedy shows? There are all these great comedy shows, and I
Sergeant
neglected that.
Bilko.
So, yeah, Sergeant Bilko was my favorite show. My dad was in World War II, and he was a master sergeant. He said Bilko was exactly like his experiences. I mean, because he was in Central America and South America, and they were guarding that important region, but they
Yeah,
didn't have any combat, so they were always trying to pull schemes
pranks
and
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 schemes.
and you know,
By
um,
by the
and
way, go. I'm sorry, Joey. Finish your
oh, I was
story.
just gonna
Then,
say, but
please.
of course, I loved your show of shows and Jerry Lewis and Dean Martin and shows
Well,
like
you got
that.
to mention the Dick Van Dyke Show only because we're speaking on Dick Van
Mhm.
Dyke's 100th birthday today.
Yeah.
I never got into that show, unfortunately. I admire Dick Van Dyke, and it's an honor to be on with his birthday. Yeah, I saw that on Facebook. For some reason,
Mhm.
for the last year, about a year ago, people posted it's Dick Van Dyke's 100th birthday, but they
I
were
don't
ahead
know,
of,
but
ahead of time.
I think today really is literally the his 100th birthday.
Ryan, he's still sharp, I guess, and
Sharp
he's
as yeah,
physically has some problems, and
amazing,
he was
amazing.
rescued from those fires uh,
Hmm.
Malibu was hit by during that terrible fire season about a year
Hmm.
ago. Somebody had to rescue him out of his
Oh
home,
my God.
fortunately,
Thank
but he's
God.
still with us and still doing well. And Orson Welles was a huge fan of the Dick Van Dyke Show. People reminded me today. He would, I think one time when we were shooting The Other Side of the Wind, he stopped shooting so he could go in his bedroom and watch the Dick Van Dyke
It's ridiculous.
show. But we also shot part of that film at Dick Van Dyke had some studios in Arizona, and I wasn't at that studio, but Wells shot part of the film at the Dick Van Dyke Studios.
I had no idea.
But I guess it was, I mean, I don't know why I've never seen the show. I think what happened was
Hmm.
in the 60s, I kind of stopped watching TV because I was studying so much. And I think that's when the show
I see.
what ran, right, Danny?
Well, I saw it a lot. Yeah, that's when
Yeah.
everybody fell in love with Mary Tyler Moore, obviously.
Sure.
But
She,
also, what's great about a show like that is its history, cultural history. You know,
mm,
the connection of the Dick Van Dyke Show to the future with the Mary Tyler Moore Show, and then going back with the
mm,
Carl
To Mel
Reiner
Brooks.
to
Yeah.
the
Carl
Mel
Reiner.
Brooks, all the so it fits into the
Yeah.
linear part of history. Television to me, you know, I love talking to Joe about television. You know,
mm,
we're a big movie people. You know, we're known for movie stuff, but television to me was probably even more impactful. I I I I always felt I could understand going to a movie and seeing a movie up on a big screen. I can never understand how a television show is transmitted into your living room.
mm,
I could,
mm.
I, and I, from the beginning, I've always felt guilt involved in how am I able to watch a TV show such as
Mm,
this? So I was a huge TV fan, and Dick
mm.
Van Dyke was part of it.
Sure.
Worked with
But
Rosemary
also
and
that's
Roy
how.
Amsterdam, and you
Oh
know,
yeah. But that's
just
and Carl Reiner, and that's
Carl Reiner.
how baseball, of course, was delivered to you. I'm not. Did you grow up in Danny in New York City
I grew up
or
mostly, well, I
or
was
in
born in
Wisconsin?
West Virginia. I was
Okay.
born in West Virginia,
And they
and
had farm teams, or
from
did you
five
go?
years, no, from the time I was 5 to 11, I lived in Columbia, South Carolina, which was
Okay.
big, impactful. But it had a minor league team, the Columbia Reds, and there would be barnstorming teams that came
Mm.
through prior to the season, and where I met my first two celebrities, Pancho Herrera and Chico Fernandez,
Ah.
who were two
Mm.
players of color, and they were waiting outside the stadium after a game, and
Mm,
I went up and talked to him. For one of the moments I'll never forget, and I said, "My father's picking us up." My brother was there too,
mm.
but I said, "My father's picking up. He'll give you a ride wherever you're going." And
Wow.
not knowing the history of it, in South Carolina in the 1950s, they had to go to the colored section of town, the colored
Mm,
section,
mm.
and being out of the hotel. But they had their own ride, and luckily, because my father, typical fashion, got a flat tire on the way home, so
Jeez.
we never did it. But that was just so impactful. You know, it's all childhood stuff that, and television was. We didn't have it. Joe, you got a TV, I think, earlier than I did.
Yeah.
We didn't get one until 1954. And so, if it's the first few years of my life, there was no television. And even when we moved to Columbia, we only had one network.
Mm.
And
Wow.
so
Yeah,
I
my
can't
dad,
believe, you know, one of the remarkable things, Adam, you know, for Joe and me, Joe came from Milwaukee, I came from Columbia. How did we ever have these careers? It's
mm.
just a remarkable to, you know, like we can
Yeah.
tap ourselves on the back, but it's just impossible that only in America. I don't,
Yeah, yeah.
but
Well,
Perhaps.
that I got to meet my favorite baseball player. Joe got to meet his favorite director, John Ford. How did this ever happen?
Well, you
How is
get
well,
to
it
see
possible?
it. You get to see that to answer that. I mean, you here's this book now that you both collaborated on called I loved movies, but and
mm,
we never really answered what the but the ellipse was for. Thank you for. I was going to ask you to. I would like to get a copy of that with Joseph McBride's signature on it someday. I have like
Oh, sure.
I
a
would too.
10 books, and I would like a Danny Peary.
Right.
Oh, there you go. I don't have. Yeah, I don't even have that. So, I mean, I have been reading a PDF, which is
Oh, I'll
actually.
send you guys copies. I just got some
Oh,
finally, you know.
yeah, I may be they may be one in the mail, but I would love to eventually get and also Danny, I don't have your cult movie book, which I would love to rectify that error in my library. But I have a dinner invitation that I need to go to momentarily, and I know we've barely scratched the surface. I apologize. It's been an hour, and we've talked about a lot of different things. But but I'm glad you brought up that last existential statement, Danny, about how you living where you grew up and how do you end up in such in a remarkable profession and
Well, I have
or
an answer for
career.
that.
Go ahead, Joe.
I just
You
saw
can.
again the movie 42, which is a terrific movie about
Yes,
Jackie
yeah,
Robinson and Branch Rickey, the guy who brought him into baseball, the wonderful general manager who wanted to integrate baseball. And they didn't have this quote in the movie, but I've lived by this quote. He once said, "Luck is the residue of design."
Design. It's a
oh
Branch
right,
Rickey
yeah,
line.
you referenced that.
Yeah, and I
Branch
think
Rickey told Jackie Robinson that. Yeah.
that and so I mean he was a very wise man. And but Danny and I we're lucky, yes, but partly because we made it happen for ourselves. That's a lesson I always told my students. Like, you got to go where the action is. We both moved to California. Danny was a USC student. He met George Lucas and all kinds of people there. And
Yeah,
I met people, because I moved to California to be a screenwriter and I worked for Variety. And then Danny is in New York, where he got to interview all kinds of people. That's another cultural hub. And you guys were both talking about all these people. I'm amazed you both interviewed the great Frederick Wiseman. And but you
there you
put
go.
yourself in these positions. You don't just sit in your hometown and think, geez,
Watch
sure.
watch from the windows.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to meet them
Yeah,
and learn from them, that's part of my motive for meeting these guys, and Danny did too. And then you share it with people by
right.
publishing these things, and it becomes part of history, and that's what we both did. And then we finally got to collaborate, which is a thrill. And Danny, it was so much fun. And Danny, one thing I should mention, Danny did a great job editing the book. He's a terrific editor. He would rearrange things, and it was always better. And he would say, we need a little more of this and all this, and rearrange stuff. And it really helped the book enormously. And he didn't have to do that, but that was great.
And
Kudos.
I always say, I never changed his writing. I just moved it around.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah,
Hey, Danny, do you have a
structure is not my greatest talent. So Danny provided a lot of structural improvements.
well, if I can get some people to read this book or either of your books as a result of this, then then I feel like I've done my work. But Danny, do you have a copy of the cult film book around at arm's length, or
There were three of them, I think, right, Danny?
Oh,
there are three? I
Yeah.
would love
I
to.
have to get up. You're going to see a blank space here. So hold on a second.
All right, and then we can wind it down. Um,
I had people writing on Facebook saying, Danny Peary, my God, Cult Movies is one of my
yeah,
favorite
yeah.
books. And
I
geez.
I have a very good friend who's like a total film nerd as well, and was very excited to hear about um, Danny coming on. Is that the same Danny
Yeah.
Peary of the cult film book? I'm saying
Yeah.
yes. I've known Danny a long time, but
He also,
not well
Yeah,
enough. But
I'm going to show
I
you two books,
please
which
do.
are they're not even my bestsellers, by the way, but the ones I'm known for. There's My Face Disappearing,
yeah,
Guide for the Film Fanatic,
Oh, great!
yeah.
and
I
Cult
gotta.
Movies.
I'm gonna.
He
Those
also
are
did alternate Oscars, which is a really
alternate
cool book
Oscars.
too.
Yeah.
Danny very cheekily writes about what films that should have won the Oscars every year, because we all know that the best films don't win the Oscars except by
Very
accident.
rarely.
So
What's that?
by accident, occasionally, like
Yes, right, right.
Unforgiven deserved.
I agreed a few
It's
times. Well,
Yeah,
just
definitely
seconds.
the exception to the rule.
I have met people who had just come up to me. I mean, film people at junkets or festivals, say, "Oh," and they start arguing with me about, you know, what I picked for a particular year as not the winners, but the also rans or also deserve award worthy
Mhm.
also rans, and I have no recollection. So people know my books better than I do at this point. So it's very bizarre,
Mm.
but it's also very flattering. But as Joe and I, Joe will agree. I mean, people revere Joe and they know his books. They can, you know, I read this
Absolutely.
book many years ago, and they'll start talking to him about it. And it's that's that we like that kind of stuff. It means we made a difference.
It's nice to hear. And Danny is a cult guy himself. I mean, there's a cult of
Yeah.
Danny Peary fans out there, and
That's true. Yeah.
but it was such a pleasure collaborating with him. And I once had a bad experience collaborating with somebody else, and I
Yeah.
swore never to do that again. But
Well,
I knew that Danny was reliable because he's published all these books, and he would be easy to. I mean, I when we did those interviews, I found him very pleasant to share ideas with, and so it was great fun doing this book with Danny. Thank you, Danny.
Well, thank you for asking me. I came out of retirement
Yeah, yeah,
to do this book,
yeah, yeah.
and it was
well,
worth it. I'm very proud of this book. That you know we hold it in our hands. Wow, I
yeah.
can't believe this book is done. It was it's an epic book, and we worked really hard on it, and
It's
we
so
got
much fun though. I mean,
everything.
yes,
Well, thank
there's
you.
yeah. It's a lot of
Thank
there's
you,
a
thank you.
it's a great read. Is a lot of really like a lot of fun information in there. A lot of fun stories in there that and it
Including my
I
introduction when I talk about
yeah.
our history.
Right.
So,
Yes. And Danny, I will if you'll do I stay out of retirement for just a little longer, maybe you can do this podcast one on one. Um, at some point. That would be a
well, I'll have
pleasure.
Joe one on one too. That you can't just ask me.
Well,
Joe and I we've done this a bunch of times, and
yeah.
Oh, you
I'm
have.
looking forward to that continuing. I mean,
Okay.
if he'll do it.
Well,
Um,
I'd be
Sure.
always happy to, but I'd love to hear you and Danny just trading stories. That'd be fantastic, you know.
you know.
Well, one of the things when you invited Joe to do this podcast, and he said, "Would you want to do it with me?" And I said, "Oh, Adam, yes."
Yeah, yeah. I
Thank
didn't
I
know
you.
you
said,
guys knew
"Adam."
each other. Yeah.
I
Yeah, no,
said, "Adam, I really liked Adam, and it's really
thank
glad to
you.
be back in touch with you."
Me too. I feel the same way, and I just thought it was a great opportunity to also to mix it up a little bit because
Mhm.
not to say that there's any Joe and I love my conversations with Joe over the at least maybe around a half a dozen times now, but this was a way to kind of just mix it up a little and change it up a little, and I
Mhm.
knew that given the Q&A structure of it that it made
Mhm.
sense. I think it made sense, and I'm glad that you were able to make it work, Danny. So thanks,
No,
and
it's
I
fun to
apologize.
do a Q and A about a Q and A book.
Yeah, and
Exactly.
us
Right.
interviewing
Right.
Adam too is adds to the
Oh.
meta structure of the whole interview. Yeah.
um well,
Thank you.
I only apologize because I could talk to you guys all night and still want more. I'm a little
Well, they
greedy.
say in show business, always lead them
Leave
wanting
them.
more, you know, so that's a
Yeah.
good piece of advice.
Well,
But
give it the title of our book once more because
please
what
show it.
Joe and I have found is in conversation we mention
Yours
the title of the
disappearing with
book and everybody thinks it's just a line from the book,
Yeah,
but it's actually called I Love Movies, but
yeah,
and
Ellipse.
there's a lot of the reasons he said uses the word but. I said
yeah,
it's because if an answer is taken, but and the but is left, but
yeah.
there's a lot of his whole life is good stuff mixed with bad stuff, and it's this conflict that goes on his
Mhm.
entire life and career. And he came out a survivor,
You know, I
which
just
is
read a quote that I wish I had put in the book, but you know, you find these things. Samuel Beckett said, "My mistakes are my life."
Mm, that's a great
What a
quote.
great quote.
It
And I have
is.
the whole section on my misadventures in Hollywood. It was a lot of mistakes that I made, but that helped form me and helped me write biographies and better film books, So mistakes are part of your life, and
Absolutely.
yeah, yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
This was not, this was,
when I make my first mistake, I'll see who I'll compare it with.
I was going to say,
Yeah.
my inviting you both on is a rare example of my not making a mistake. So
Yeah.
thank you
Good on,
both.
good on.
Thank you
Oh,
both.
thank you
Thank
so
you.
much.
Thank
All
you.
right. Have a
We'll be
great
in
evening.
touch.
Yeah, and
Yes. Yes.
we'll send you books. Anyway,
Oh,
good
yeah.
seeing you guys. Yeah.
Same here.
Yeah, thank
Bye.
you.
All right, guys.
Thank you.
Bye.